Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Welcome to another video. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. John Hancock is a subscriber. Much appreciated. We are at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, one of the highlights of my year. It's an incredible show. John has been doing it for how long?
Oh geez, 15 years.
And you're one of the original, one of the OGs.
One of the original organizers to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. I was with fellow other organizers, Rick Weiss, Chuck Van Pelt, Toby, Nick and Lacey. Did the first six years of the show when it was very small.
Well, my first one was in 2017, and I've tried to make it back every time since, and I've been to most since then. Incredible show. So I thought I would have John on my channel, since we're just kind of hanging out at the hotel before breakfast, to answer 3 questions I like to ask. And we're going to talk about his favorite video game of all time, which we'll get to. We're going to talk about how he sort of discovered video games, the first game he remembers playing. You know, I'm OG, I'm retro, I like to know the origins. And we're going to discuss, what was the third thing I said?
The third thing that you said is a favorite game of all time.
That, I already mentioned that.
Oh,
we're going to talk about what led from you being a gamer into content creation.
Oh, yeah.
So, but first we'll start with, what's your origin with gaming? How did that come about? Like, what's your first memory of video games?
So my first memory of games, we had a Shakey's Pizza. And I don't know if that's a nationwide chain.
Yes, well, it's not in Dallas, Fort Worth. So
we had a Shakey's West Coast Shakey's Pizza. My dad really was a penny pincher and really liked that pizza to go, the toppings go all the way to the end. And so he really liked Shakey's Pizza.
Right.
And so we would go there, and my early memories were this place had some early arcades. And so Space Invaders was an early memory of mine. I remember getting on the bar stool. I was so short that I had to get on the bar stool to like see.
And how old would you have been then? I'm assuming this would have been 78, 79.
So I would probably say, and it had not been brand new, so we typically in Reading got stuff later. I would say early 80s.
Okay,
so probably 82, because I would have been 5.
Okay, yeah.
And so 5 to me, like, I don't think it was probably before that.
Right.
So definitely Space Invaders was one of my early memories. They also had, I do believe, one of the duck hunts that was not the duck hunt, where like I saw ducks like on the wall where like you would take a...
Like electromechanical?
Yeah, electromechanic duck
Excellent.
hunt. Yeah.
I love those electromechanical games. They're so physical, and you really feel like you're doing something, you know, instead of just a screen. I love them. They're great.
Space Invaders was an easy memory to remember. They also had one of those like not Destroyer, like it was an early Atari game where like you know, there's warships and you have to like take them out, or like you're taking out submarines or something.
Right.
I remember there's so many
submarines were like really popular in games in the late 70s and early 80s.
And I don't remember the title, but there were so many clones. So like it could have been a clone, it could have been
Right, that's great. So some of my earliest memories gaming were at Pizza Inn and Pizza Hut. And my dad, like yours, was very, very frugal.
Oh, yes.
And pizza was cheap back then. You could feed the whole family with a big pizza. And the pizza was better back then at Pizza Hut and Pizza Inn. I mean, when you went to Pizza Hut, they brought it out on a big, you know, iron skillet, thick and tons of tomato sauce. Way different than today.
So my dad would always get like a combination because he felt like he got more food. and so when you eat it, he'd always just like, the toppings have to fall off. Like he would scrape them all up onto like that final piece and taco it.
Yeah. That's awesome. So great early memories there with gaming. And mine was in 75. I remember Pong and Midway's Gunfight, which I've told you guys many times.
Love Gunfight.
Gunfight is amazing. Yeah. It's pure mono action, one of the greatest 2-player games of all time. And of course, they did it as Outlaw for the 2600.
And Gunfighter, which is a homebrew by an early homebrew on the 2600.
Oh, no, so I hadn't played that one.
And I think it's Gunfighter. I'll look it up after this and see if that's still available.
And you guys can let us know in the comments for sure too. All right, so next up, how did you, growing up as someone who enjoyed video games, how did that eventually lead into content creation?
Well, I always loved games growing up. My dad, our first console was a Radio Shack TV scoreboard.
Oh,
I
cool.
do believe that the TV scoreboards were in the early 80s, so they were kind of a late clone of Pongs. And so that was the first console I had in my house.
He probably bought it on discount, huh?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. And I had the one of the 1995 the $20 TV scoreboard, the little ones that were really when Pongs were going out.
Yeah.
I never had an Atari. Eventually, we got a Nintendo. We got a Nintendo in '87.
That's when I got mine.
First computer, my brother got in an accident and used some of the money to buy an Atari ST. We had an Atari computer store in town.
Yeah.
And they were distributing Atari ST stuff at the time.
Nice.
So I grew up with that.
That's cool. That's a great computer.
First console I earned was a Sega Genesis. And I wanted a Neo Geo, but I saved up enough money for a Sega Genesis.
Nice.
So that's kind of my journey early on.
Right.
As I got into high school and college, it evolved from Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, PlayStation. But as I got into college, like anybody, I didn't have a lot of money.
Right.
And started retro collecting. That was kind of a cheap hobby where I could take $20, go to a thrift store, and pick up games. But
it was an amazing time, man. When I would go out, I did the same thing. I would go to pawn shop to pawn. I would map out a route all around Fort Worth, pawn shops, thrift stores, and you would always find stuff.
Yeah, and
I would never come home empty-handed.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, but like I literally could, for $40, maybe if I splurge and spend $40,
right,
I could bring home like a grocery bag of like classic Atari 2600 games.
Absolutely.
That was my first retro console. Was a 2600. Now my cousin had one. My cousins.
Right.
But I didn't have one until the early 90s. Like in television, Atari. But I really gravitated to the classics. I got connected to Digipress and eventually Atari Age.
Did you subscribe to the Digital Press fanzine?
I did.
Same.
I did.
Same. Early 90s.
Yeah. And Joe Santulli, and that was a huge impact on my collecting.
Right.
I met several friends that I'm still friends with today. This is a long story, so
you're good.
And so I started seriously getting into retro collecting in the early 90s. So I've been doing it for over 30 years.
The early 90s were an interesting time because it was really a small niche thing, but there were some pretty hardcore collectors in the early 90s, and there were some 2600 games that were considered valuable, but so much of it was so cheap.
So there was a lot of like boomers that were collecting Atari. I'm a Gen Xer, I'm 48, so I was collecting newer stuff like Sega Genesis, and they kind of laughed because it's like, are you collecting all that like Sega sports crap? But that's what I could afford.
Right.
And I really loved Sega Genesis, and so I was mostly in the 90s collecting like Nintendo and Sega and of all things Odyssey 2.
Oh, I love Odyssey 2.
Which was my first complete set.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
And so from that, I started really just enjoying retro collecting. I was in an area that there wasn't a lot of other collectors. Right. I was known as the collector of the area. Right. Using FuncoLand to gather a lot of like N64 and Nintendo stuff in the later 90s.
Yeah.
So then that's when the things started really to heat up. So I got married in 2002, and I really kind of progressed where I started amassing a pretty decent sized collection, to the point where Tips and Tricks magazine
did
an article on my collection.
Oh, you were in one of those?
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
The Room of Doom.
The Room of Doom. I remember it. That was one of my favorite. That was probably my favorite part of the magazine.
January 2004. It's the one with Tony Hawk with like Spider-Man and like these different article covers.
I remember it. I remember that issue. I'll have to go back and get that.
Yeah, it's.
I remember seeing the cover.
04.
Yeah.
But I was in some other magazines as well, and then I was going to be moving to Washington, and that's where I met Rick Weiss at a Classic Gaming Expo, and he says, I'm moving to Washington. He's like, where are you moving? I go, Vancouver, Washington. He's like, I told him my address. He's like, that's like a mile away from my house.
Oh wow, that's cool.
So I met Rick at a Classic Gaming Expo.
For those of you who don't know, Rick Weiss is probably the figurehead these days of the president of Portland Retro Gaming Expo. Yeah. So
we became friends. I got connected with the Northwest Classic Games Enthusiasts. I was like the last member of that. And then started helping with Rick and some other collectors forming before it was called the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. He was kind of shy, so I was the person that was going into stores and like asking them if they wanted to be part of this upcoming show. Yeah, I get Rick is such a nice guy, but he's definitely shy. Yeah. So that got that ball rolling, and then eventually I wanted to come up with a way. I had a lot of video game stuff, so I started making these using a digital like Fujifilm camera. Information videos on the nuts and bolts to video game collecting.
And what year would have this have been?
Oh, that's like probably mid 2000s.
Wow, yeah,
And
before
so,
YouTube really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for like the next like I don't know, like probably 5 years, I was making these informative videos, burning them on DVD discs, and using Windows Media Player, Windows Movie Maker, Maker, and then selling them at trade shows.
Oh wow!
For scratch money for video games.
Right, that's cool.
So then people really liked them. They were crude, they weren't edited, but it was good.
Did you look like a big nerd talking about it and stuff?
Oh, it's terrible. So like I didn't put I just had the camera without a tripod, and I was like showing all my stuff. And so what's kind of funny is those videos are still on my YouTube channel.
Oh, okay,
And so,
that's cool.
But that's
no reason to delete them.
So then some other YouTube started happening late, like not before 2010, but like
yeah, and I think AVGN started 2006, 7.
Yeah.
So
by like 8 or 9, three big YouTubers, I was on their channel. So Gamester 81, John Lester,
good old John Lester,
Happy Console Gamer, and then the big break for me was Metal Jesus Rocks.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
He saw that I had a lot of knowledge about games, and so he has like I don't know over 50 guests on his channel.
Yeah,
and so I came on and did some like dedicated videos for like information. He bought my nuts and bolts of video game collecting.
Oh, that's cool.
And used it to inform himself.
Yeah.
A lot of people said that they used those to like help them collect.
That was the pre-beard Metal Jesus Rocks.
And I had a goatee at the time. And at one point I was shaving, and then I'm never going back to that. So
right.
So then people said you ought to do your own channel. And so in 2009 I started uploading those early DVD movie collection things. I sold over 500 of them.
Nice. Wow. That's good.
Period.
Well, see, at that time, you weren't competing with a lot of other content.
No.
My very first book that came out in 2007, it sold like crazy at the early shows I did because nobody else had books there. It shows Leonard Herman and not many other people.
Yeah, and so, it was crude how it was presented, and it's hard to look at now, but, you do something over and over again, you eventually get better.
Right.
And I like to talk about video games. Eventually, I even taught at community college intro to game development.
Oh, that's cool.
Because I got connected to PRGE, dean of a college department saw me.
Yeah.
And Walter Morales, and he says, "Hey, do you want to teach this class?" And I did it for 5 years.
Oh, that's super cool.
So I got a college job out of being involved with Portland Retro Gaming Expo.
Right.
Eventually stepped down because it was too much time, but I did a charity event for 10 years with friends, Callous Gamers for Kids, raised $100,000 locally, and it just kind of took off from there. And then now, for the last 10 years, I've done YouTube, but I'm also really getting to becoming an independent game publisher.
That's amazing.
So,
and I've noticed, not that trend necessarily, but I've seen you and Riggs and a few others, prominent YouTubers, start publishing homebrew games, and I think that's incredibly cool.
Yeah, for me, I have access. I'm part of Atari Age Forums, and I've been part of that for a long time.
Yeah.
I would still be on Digipress.
SW11S.
SW11S, yeah.
Yes. I remember that name from before I even knew you.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I enjoy being part of the community.
Right.
Recently, I just published a Intellivision game and had a lot of support from the Intellivision community.
Well, that is a hardcore fan base.
Yes, it is.
And there's a lot of good folks in there.
Yeah, a good group of people.
Yeah.
And they were able to help me out quite a bit, and I was grateful for that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so next up is a ColecoVision game, and that Block'em Sock'em is coming to ColecoVision.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
And then
nice.
I'll make sure to get you a copy.
Oh, awesome. I appreciate it. He knows I'm a hardcore ColecoVision fan.
Yeah. And you're a good friend, too. We've been at several shows together, so...
Yeah, we've been doing shows together, setting up near each other, or sometimes at the same booth, and it works out great because John's very popular, and some of his fans will come over and discover my books for the first time, and it's awesome, man.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, I'm going to continue with... publishing different games. I have some ideas. And sometimes I come up with like a game idea. I'm not a coder, but I do help with level design. I play test, and I just have some cool stuff planned. And
That's
kind
great.
of what I'm going to plan on doing, I think, moving forward. And still do YouTube, and I enjoy talking about the oddball. Like if you're looking for like any like homebrew or aftermarket games, that's the type of stuff I like to talk about.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Man, I'm sure you're like me. And once the second generation consoles were, in the dustbin of history, and once you're moving on to more modern systems, did it ever occur to you in a million years that people would still be making games for those old consoles?
No.
Those, if you didn't live through it, you don't realize those old consoles became junk. Yeah. Literally, a lot of people would just put it out by the curb for the trash collectors.
Yeah, I got my Atari 2600 and I brought it home. I was so excited. I had a black and white TV.
Right.
And the first thing my dad said was, "Why? Like, you have a color TV in there?"
Right.
And I'm like, "Dad, but this is my TV and my console.
Yep.
And I can play it, and then you can watch whatever show you want."
Right.
And he was just like, it was like a hard thing to process.
It was pretty unusual to have a second TV in the home back then. Sometimes there would be two TVs. Typically, most homes had one, and you had to fight over the living room TV. Yeah. My first ColecoVision, it was in the family living room, and it had to share space with people watching TV. And so I went out. I was 16 years old. I got a job. I paid $250 for a 19-inch color TV with my first job money, and it was at Videoland, and that was with my brother-in-law's employee discount, so it was about a $290 TV, 19-inch color, but I loved it. I put it in my room and had my ColecoVision television, Odyssey 2, and all that back there. So yeah, it was a different time back then.
It is, and I think that I have so many stories I could tell. The YouTube community shows and conventions. I do about 10 shows a year, and I met some wonderful people, and it's really a tight-knit community because there's a lot of people that go to multiple shows, and I met some amazing people and experienced some awesome things.
These conventions get to be like a family reunion because you see each other 2 or 3 or more times a year at these shows, and sometimes only at the shows. Yeah. And it really becomes, you look forward to seeing your friends and hanging out more so than even the convention itself. That the after hours hangout and the having a drink and all that stuff becomes as much fun as the show, or making great finds. And with video games, for me, this led to my journalism career. This led to me writing full time for over 20 years. I've met a lot of cool people. Some of my best friends today are through retro gaming. I met through retro gaming. So let's get to your favorite video game of all time. Now, this is extremely tough because we're talking PCs, we're talking handhelds, we're talking consoles, arcades, but you have to boil it down to one game that defines you.
And it's by far number one. There's not even it's not even a close second.
Awesome.
So my whole collection started in the early 90s when I started retro collecting, because I didn't have my original Nintendo growing up. I don't know what happened to that. I know I sold off some stuff in college when I started dating.
Yeah, as one does.
And so I gave a good friend $50, and all I said was find something interesting. Mm-hmm. And he was going to a big flea market. The San Jose flea market's huge. It's just well known that you can find a bunch of cool stuff. So he came back and he's like, "Hey, I found this. Hope this is okay." For $50, he found a box Atari 7800 and 50 Atari 7800 and 2600 games.
Oh, that's awesome.
I flipped out.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome.
Right.
One of the games he got me was a box copy. I still have it today of Robotron 2084.
Nice. For the 7800.
Yeah, for the 7800. What I loved about that game is it was cool because you could play with a friend, moving.
Right.
One person can control the fire, and the other person in the second controller port could control the movement, or vice versa. No, the first person could control the movement of the character. The second player could control the direction.
Right, because if you're playing it by yourself and you rubber band the controllers together, you can play it like the arcade version, dual joystick.
So my first dual joystick controller was literally from a shelf, and I just zip tied two TAC2 controllers together. Right. And that's when I played Robotron.
That's genius.
And I had a Post-it note because it didn't save your score.
Right.
I had a Post-it note on my TV. And oh my gosh, I absolutely love that version. The nice thing, if you don't know about the Atari 7800, is it's able to handle a ton of sprites on the screen without any flicker. That's its great advantage over the Nintendo Entertainment System. And so I just absolutely love that version of game. The version of the game. I love the arcade, but that was my main experience with Robotron 2084. I played the arcade before, but yeah, I love all versions of it. Even the new Champ Games, Robot Wars, is it 2088? I don't know what they.
Right, it's set in a different year.
It's Robotron.
I like your ingenuity with the one-player mode because the 5200 came with a controller holder. It had a bigger box and a controller holder. Atari went cheap, and they didn't do that for the 7800. So you had to. I know a lot of people rubber banded them together, but you made like a little. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, now you have retro Game Boys. They're on eBay and they have their own site, but they've made like a custom Robotron controller.
That's cool.
I know, and I have so many versions of controller holders to play it. I have to I want that, but where am I going to put it? But yeah, I just love that game, and it really brings me joy. To me, the best way to describe it is, if you were to, I have ADHD, and so if you were to put video game into a visual representation of what is ADHD like, it's Robotron 2084.
I love it. It's hectic, it's frantic, you're running for your life immediately. You're not spending 30 minutes looking for a sword.
No.
I mean, you're out there and you are just on the lamb. I mean, it's incredible, and you're rescuing innocents, and it's just a great game.
And eventually you're gonna die.
Right.
I love that about the game, though. I love that.
It's one of my favorites.
You can't beat it.
Yeah.
It overwhelms you, and then you're dead.
Right.
I like that about the game.
It's a metaphor for life.
Yeah. That's why I like John Carpenter's 82 thing.
Right. Yes. Yes.
When it ends, it's not a happy ending. They're gonna freeze to death.
Right. Exactly. Great stuff here. We're ending on a positive note.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking. I'm sure you're already subscribed to the Immortal John Hancock. If you're not, give him a sub. I'll put a link to his channel in the description here. And thank you for liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching. We're going to head out to breakfast and go to day 3 of the Portland Retro Gaming Expo and have some more fun. And then I'm headed back to work Monday, as is John.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, John, for being on the channel. I really appreciate it. We always have a blast at these shows. And thank you guys for watching. You are awesome. We'll talk to you in another video.